Hi! On the Woodpecker today, I'm making small boxes for special gifts. Everybody who gave us shelter during our trip received a can of maple syrup. Nothing says Quebec better than maple syrup. But also made some small boxes to give as presents to the spouses of the people who we bugged the longest. The first thing I do is design the maple lid. In fact, it's easier than it looks. The next step is to check if the dimensions are okay and draw an oval. Since it's far from where it should be, I select it and center it. Then it's time to write the text I want. And if I don't make too many typos, this goes fairly quickly. And I don't forget to select bold. Just like the oval, I need to center this. But it's a bit too high. I have to move it down a bit. The last element of my design is my Woodpecker logo. It's the same I used for my bellows. I just need to import it, and I'm set. But it's way too big. I scale it down and place it where it needs to be. And now the bulk of my design is done. But right now, I just have the bird, which is in 3D. So I select the oval and create a dome shape from its profile. Okay, since I've done this before, all the settings are at the right value. To keep everything neat, I rename the component and place the bird on top. I also need to do the same thing for the text. The only difference is that I don't want a dome-shaped text, I want it to be flat. I'm almost done, but the Woodpecker is not okay. I need to fix this. But first, I rename the text component and move the bird on top of the pile. Then I change how the bird is combined with the rest of the design. So I select the button, which doesn't combine the component to the rest of the design. But now the bird is lower than the rest of the design. It's pretty obvious when I look at the green spots. So I add more height to the shape, up until I don't see green anymore. And this is exactly what I want. But this needs to be lower than that. So I add a zero plane and change the height of the base lower. And with this, my lid design is complete. I can make the G-code files. First, the roughing pass. This pass is done with a 1/4 inch bit. The only setting I change is that I don't cut up to the side of the model. Then I press calculate. Now I need to also make the finishing pass. Here again, I don't cut up to the edge of the models. I even cut a little bit less. And press calculate again. And here's my box lid. I just need to save both passes and I'm done. And I can go back inside the shop and surface some pieces of maple. Now that it's done, I can clamp the first piece on the CNC bed and carve the first lid. Obviously, it's not as fast as this. In fact, the roughing and finishing passes take about 6 hours. I'm always fascinated to see the carving appears like this before my eyes. So after several days of sculpting, I have 2 perfect lids and 2 with small defects. But I'm letting you believe that everything went as planned. But no, it didn't. I had a bunch of rejects. I could have passed on that. But at least I figured out why. It's because of the router's power cord. Yes, the Velcro straps holding the power cord to the chain got stuck in the stepping motor, and because of that, the router was not moving like it was supposed to. On this side of the carving, it doesn't look that bad. But on the bird's sides, it's another story. I fixed this by using electrical tape instead of Velcro. But even if the carving is done, I'm not totally done with the CNC. I need to carve the date on the other side. Again, it's not as fast in real life. This takes about 6 minutes. It's finally over with high-tech. But my lids are not done yet. I need to cut the unwanted wood around the carving. I begin by cutting the bulk with the table saw. When I'm done, I realized that I forgot to sand the back of the lid. So I need to reuse what I just got to support the lid while I sand it. But when I'm done, I still need to finish the flat part of the lid. I begin by removing most of what I didn't cut with end planes. When I'm almost there, I finish the job with the sander. I find I have more control on hard maple with a sander than with planes. When it's all at the right height, I make the final sanding. I use the orbital sander for the flat part. The carving is sanded by hand. Then I leave this alone for a while. I'm going to make the actual mahogany box. I'll use this old piece, but I need to sand it a little. It's more than 100-year-old, and it shows. The drum sander does a darn good job, but it's not totally done yet. I still need a bit more sanding. Next, I can rip this to the height of the box and cut all the long pieces. When I'm done, I move the stop and cut the small sides. This is all the wood I'll need for 4 boxes. To contrast from the high-tech carving, I'll join those boxes with hand-cut dovetails. The first thing I do is to set the marking gauge to the thickness of my wood and mark 4 boards at once. Then I make more marks where I want my dovetails. For this, I use 2 compasses, set to different widths. Then I trace some lines on my marks. The last thing to do is to trace the dovetail itself. I identify what I need to remove and cut along the lines. With 4 boards, it's easier to cut straight. When it's cut, I identify the position of the board and I'm ready to cut the dovetails. I like clamping a square piece of wood in the marking gauge line. I find it helps to cut straighter. I begin by widening the marking gauge line and removing a tiny wood wedge. With this removed, I can cut a bit deeper. Remove another wedge and cut even deeper. Then I turn the board around and redo all the same operations. Eventually, all the dovetails are cut. I just have to remove the pieces of unwanted wood and clean a little. I do this on both sides of the 8 long sides. But I still have the pins to do. So after identifying all the joints, I use the marking gauge to trace around the pin boards. Clamp this and I'm ready. The first thing I do is sharpen my pencil. I redo this on each marking. Then I place the dovetail board where it should be and trace the shape of the pins. To help cut straighter, I trace a straight line in front of me. Then I cut the pins. I try to cut the lines in two. It doesn't take too much, and the joint is too tight or too slack. When all the cuts are done, it's mostly the same thing as the dovetail. But the waste is easier to remove. I also need to remove both ends. For that, I use the saw. Just like for the dovetails, I need to clean the pins a bit. Finally, I can try the fit. Generally, just like here, everything goes well. But sometimes I need to go back and work on the pins a little bit. I do that for all the remaining boards, and eventually I have 4 boxes. But a box without a bottom looks more like a magician's box than anything else. So I need to cut some grooves for the bottom. But to avoid goofing up, I mark where I want them. Now I just have to cut all the grooves. I make sure I'm going to cut at the right place and cut the grooves on the small boards. I begin with them because the groove is right through. Then I add some stop blocks and cut the grooves on the dovetails boards. And here's the result. The right stop keeps the boards at the right place while I push the board into the turning bit. When it's flat on the roller table, I push the board up to the next stop. Then without moving, I turn off the roller and wait until the bit is not turning anymore before removing the board. Now I'm ready for the bottoms. I assemble one box and take the measurements of the bottom. I have to use 2 thin pieces of wood to figure out the short side. But for the long one, I can use my regular tool. But I still need some wood for my bottoms. I find a piece of maple that I rip into. I have 2 thin pieces of wood, but not really straight, and way too thick. I fix this right away. Okay, they now have the right thickness, but I still need to sand this smoother. And cut them a little bit smaller than the measurements I took. Then I spray all the bottoms. I do that for 2 reasons. The first one, since it's solid maple, if the wood changes size due to humidity, well, I won't have a spot without any varnish. The second one is to prevent the bottoms to get glued with the sides. While the varnish is drying, I can take care of other things. First, I fill the old screw holes with lacquer stick. It's a must when using old reclaimed wood. When it's cold, it's solid again, and I can sand this. Then I finish the rest of the sanding by hand. The bottoms of the boxes are way too fragile to be sanded with a power tool. When the bottoms are dry enough, I sand them a little and I'm ready to glue the boxes. Well, this is not too complicated. I spread glue where needed, inside the dovetails and pins, and put both pieces together. I wipe the excess glue right away. I do the same thing for the other pin boards. I spread glue on all the rest of the dovetails and pins, put the bottom in place, and the last side. Last thing to do is to clamp this. I do this 4 times, and now I just have to wait for the glue to dry. When it is, I sand all the dovetails to the same height as the rest of the box. You may notice that I let the dust fly all over the place. It's not an oversight. I just want to collect some dust to fill the joints. So after picking up some dust, I brush some varnish on each joint and drop some dust over it that I push the best I can into the cracks. Since it's a super thin coat of varnish, it dries pretty quickly. And I can give the final sanding. I'm not done sanding. But now that the sanding is over, I can finish the lid. First, I cut it to the right dimensions. Then I mark where I want the hinge to be, and with the hinge itself, I trace its shape on the box. Then it's as simple as removing some wood. When I'm done, I place the hinges in place, and with the lid on top, I mark where the hinges should be on the lid. With those marks, I can do the same thing I did with the box. But maple is way harder than mahogany. When I'm done, I can drill pilot holes for the screws. I begin with the lid. For now, I'm using middle screws, so the threading will be there for the final screws. Now that the lid part is done, I do the same thing on the box sides. And here's the first box completed. I do all of this 3 more times. Now I do the real finish sanding. And now I'm ready for the finish. I begin by removing the dust. Then I spray all the lids. Then the boxes. It's not too long and everything is drying in the shop. Several hours later, it's ready for the next coat. I start by hand sanding the varnish. The flat parts are sanded with sandpaper and the carving with a scrub pad. After cleaning a little, I'm ready for the second and final coat. When it's dry, I can assemble all of it. But the ends of my screws are a bit too thick. I need to shorten them. The surface is not really smooth. I give it a finer polishing. I do this for all the screws. But the lid screws are too long. I also need to remove their tips. After all this, I'm ready to assemble the boxes. I begin by screwing the hinges to the lid. Next, it's time for the long screws. 1 box done. I need to do this 3 more times. And now all 4 boxes are finished. I'll bring those 2 on the plane. My dovetails are not that bad. I like it. But I'm not totally done. I need to make some space in my luggage. And here, I'm giving my boxes away.
Pour moi.
Oui.
Oh,
Juste pour toi.
I really liked making those boxes. I hope that you liked watching me making them. And see you soon for another episode of the Woodpecker.